It's super meaningful to have the opportunity to connect and hopefully offer some practices that might be of benefit. So what I would like for us to do together is to start off by just considering, what is the experience of emotion? We're talking about emotional resilience, but what does that actually mean? How do emotions impact our everyday functioning? We're going to look more specifically at anger, irritation, and frustration. This is relating to some of the questions that we received from you before we started this webinar. And then, of course, maybe most importantly, throughout this, looking at what are the strategies that we have available to help working with and regulating these emotions. Just to give you a little sense of where I'm coming from, I, as Alyssa mentioned, had the good fortune to be a postdoc at the Osho Center for Integrative Medicine. And in my time there, was able to develop training for undergraduate medical education and graduate medical education for stress resilience. So even outside of these really unique times of the pandemic, of course, healthcare is stressful. You all know the rates of burnout across different fields of healthcare and across interprofessional groups. And so how do we work with the day-to-day stress, which now is even more acute? And I'm relying really on the work that I've been doing for years, which is really encouraging people to get curious about their emotional experiences. I started this work actually as a social worker. I worked at San Francisco General Hospital in the emergency room. I hope some of my colleagues are online now. Just really wonderful experience that showed me how meaningful healthcare work can be. And in fact, that meaning is such a great buffer to our stress. If we keep in mind, as Alyssa suggested to us, that what I'm doing is the most meaningful thing I can do, that's a wonderful way to motivate us to really work with and work through some of the more difficult emotions that may be arising. I'll also share with you a little bit about a collaboration I had with the Dalai Lama and my dad around creating an atlas of emotion, or a way for us to really understand and investigate a bigger vocabulary for our emotion experiences. Before we go any further, let's just take one moment right here, with your eyes closed or open, to just notice what is happening in the body. And for some of us, that may feel confusing or strange. You may say, well, I'm sitting or I'm lying down. That's a good place to start, maybe noticing the experience of your weight as you are standing or being supported by a chair beneath you. But then take another moment and notice, what does it feel like to be in your clothing right now? What is the sensation of the texture of your shirt or your pants? And then take one more moment and notice, what is the experience inwardly? It may help to close the eyes a bit. And notice, is there an emotion residue, maybe from whatever you were doing before the webinar? Or maybe there's even some emotions around what happens after this webinar, when you go back to work or are doing various tasks. We hold a lot of different experiences of emotion in the body, and one way we can begin to learn how to regulate them is simply by noticing their experience in the moment with curiosity and kindness. So briefly, notice sensations in the face. Notice sensations around the throat and the neck. Notice sensations in the chest and in the belly. Okay, if your eyes were closed, please blink them back open. And that is just a tiny moment for us to take this idea and this intellectual process in some ways of learning about emotion and applying it to this moment. What I found in some of my research with the residents is that they were surprised that when they paid attention to their emotion, there were actually more emotions that were enjoyable in their day than they had recognized. So developing this emotion awareness doesn't just have to be for what's hard. Let's talk a bit more about just the basic foundation of what emotions are and the impact they have on our day-to-day life. Our emotions include what happens from the neck up, so our expression and our communication. What you see here is an image actually of my dad. I'm second generation UCSF, and he mapped all of the facial expressions possible in the human face through our 42 different muscle groups. Some of you asked about, how do I communicate to my family to make them feel a bit more at ease when I go to work every day? And it's important for us to recognize that it's not just the words that are impacting how we affect other people. It's also the facial expression and the vocal tone. So when we're thinking about communicating information, especially if we want people to feel safe and at ease, it might be important for us to do that little check-in of, what am I feeling right now? And can I come from a place of a bit more stability before I communicate so that I'm not inadvertently emitting these messages of fear or irritation instead of one of calm and presence? What you also see here is an image of emotions that are embodied. Maybe when you looked just briefly at the body, you were able to recognize a bit of tension. Maybe you noticed that there was a sensation of unease or anxiety. This research study that this image is from showed that when people started to really reflect on their emotion experiences, they were able to identify pretty clearly what were the sensations in the body associated with that emotion. And just as Alyssa suggested, when we notice and pay close attention to our emotions, when we label them in the body, then we're able to have some space around them, and we can start to understand how we might most effectively respond. I also want to mention, this may be incredibly obvious, that our emotions really impact our brain and our thinking. When we are in the grip of our emotion, for example, frustration, it's as though we're looking through the lens of frustration. Everything around us feels irritating. And though our emotions only last 30 to 90 seconds, if we continue thinking about them, we create a cycle of rumination. So to really keep in mind that our emotions are impacting how we see the world, how we respond to the world, and our likely behaviors. The last part here I want to mention is that emotions are shared. Though we are experiencing them uniquely inside of ourselves, there is actually a factor of contagion of emotions. So that if we are feeling a great deal of anxiety, that may rub off on our colleagues and our family members and vice versa. And for many of us at this time, there is this kind of collective experience of low-level anxiety, and that potentiates our other emotion experiences. We can consider whether or not it's possible for us to bring a bit more calmness as the contribution that we can create into the groups that we're with, whether at home or at work. So basically, I want to tell you simply that there are many different emotions, and they respond to different opportunities and challenges in our environment. We respond differently toward things that make us feel threatened than things that make us feel loss or sadness. And right now, we're going to focus simply on anger and look at that emotion. So this was a question from you all. Many of us are also struggling with anger and the moral injury of working under less than ideal conditions and poor recommendations. I've actually heard this from some of my colleagues I've been working with in the last couple of weeks and developing support and resilience. And I want to first off say that it is totally reasonable to feel anger and totally understandable to have that sense of intense irritation or frustration. And all of our emotions are quite functional. They exist for a reason. They help us move through. The triggers to anger very commonly are kind of being blocked in our progress and also injustice. So this example is one where we are being triggered to anger by a sense of injustice and also being blocked fundamentally from feeling safe. Now, what does anger achieve? Anger actually has a purpose. Anger helps us feel powerful, and it gives us some energy. In comparison to maybe facing grief of, wow, everything that's being lost in this moment that is so hard, all the connections and all the resources, as well as for many people, just different landscapes within the family of financial security. So when we think of that feeling of sadness, it's heavy, whereas with anger, we have a motivation, and this can be really useful. It can help us advocate. Now, occasionally the way that we respond to anger actually gets us in more trouble. We create division and conflict. So what does our anger really need for us to use it effectively? It actually needs us to be patient and kind. And that patience is one in which we give ourselves the time to relax before we respond. And the kindness means that we're not only being kind to ourselves, anger actually doesn't generally feel good, but also we're being kind to whoever we are angry with. Now, this can be a bit challenging for folks, this idea of, well, why would I be kind in the face of injustice? This person who's asking me to work without a mask, they don't deserve my kindness. I totally understand that point of view. And yet, the point here is, how do we ourselves have as much capacity for calmness? How do we reserve our energy and not feel drained? And honestly, that means unhooking from our rumination of anger. So we can be angry in the moment and advocate, we need more protective gear. But if we go home and we continue ruminating, and it even wakes us up in the night, we're really stressing ourselves out. And at that moment, some kindness of, all of these systems right now are so taxed. Actually, nobody knows the right thing to do. That's the kind of kindness we can, work around while understanding what's happening. I want to just briefly share with you an idea that helps unpack emotions a bit further. Understanding that emotions have a trigger, an experience, and a response. When we are triggered to an emotion, it actually happens in under 25th of a second. So we are going to be triggered immediately. Maybe we receive an email telling us that today a certain amount of people have masks and others do not. And the experience of that physiological response will be immediate. So the response area of what we then do with that emotion, that's where we have some room. That's where we might have some choice and be able to do something that's slightly more effective. So when we think about developing and working with emotional awareness, what we're actually thinking about is, can we improve our constructive responses? When we have an emotion that triggers us, such as being afraid to go into work the next day, we just don't know what will face us. Very normal and understandable emotion, an emotion that's designed actually to help us. So we think, I'm not sure what will happen tomorrow, I feel a lot of anxiety. A constructive way to respond to that might be to use the kind of sleep hygiene that Alyssa mentioned of, okay, I'm not sure about tomorrow, there's a lot ahead, I'm going to go to bed early, I'm going to not look at any media that will make me upset, I'm going to do whatever is possible that is soothing for me in this moment. Versus we have that same feeling of anxiety and overwhelm, but we respond by maybe trying to distract with Netflix, or maybe trying to eat ice cream, or maybe drinking red wine. And in fact, that really destroys our quality of sleep. So the same emotion, the same trigger, the same feeling, but our response has changed. So I want us for a moment to come back to that simple practice of noticing emotion in the body. So I invite you again to close your eyes if that's comfortable. And this time, as we notice what's happening in the body, really do so with a lot of kindness. If it doesn't feel as though there's anything in the body right now, you're feeling neutral or relaxed, maybe you bring to mind an event that happened the last day in which you felt somewhat frustrated or irritated. Memory is a powerful elicitor of our emotion, and if we bring it to mind, often we will get the embodied response. So inviting in that memory of frustration or irritation, just briefly, as though it were a snapshot, and then letting it go, and bringing all the attention and awareness to the sensations in the body, noticing what has been stirred up, and as though we were welcoming a dear friend, inviting these sensations in with kindness. And then imagining as though we could provide space for all of these emotion experiences, that our breath helped create a little bit of room in between what could feel like a dense emotional experience. So as we inhale space into the sensations. And as we exhale some kindness to the part of ourselves that may still be a bit frustrated. So 3 more breaths here. Inhaling, inviting spaciousness. Exhale, kindness. And then taking a moment to return to the sensations in the body. Notice, have they shifted or changed at all? And gently, if your eyes have been closed, blinking them back open. Thank you for giving that a try and just starting to notice and begin familiarizing yourself with the felt experience in the body. Some of the ways we might further this familiarity is noticing the quality of sensations in our body, maybe tight, heavy, hot, tingling, and really giving ourselves that opportunity. We can also, as Alyssa mentioned, really improve our vocabulary of our vocabulary of emotion, improving what is a granularity, really noticing, okay, I'm angry, but what kind of angry? Am I annoyed? Am I frustrated? Do I feel maybe all the way to fury? And this is a simple example from the Atlas of Emotion website. And you can use this with yourself, your colleagues, and your friends. So when we think about the strategies, we think about increasing our emotion awareness, noticing and being clear on what is making us emotional. What's the trigger? What's the felt experience? Where is our opportunity to respond in a constructive way? We have this granularity or ability to be very specific about what are the sensations in my body or what is the specific emotion I'm feeling. There's also the kind reappraisal. So whatever we're feeling, frustrated, maybe we're feeling guilt that we're not doing enough, maybe we're feeling sad, to just kindly accept and notice these sensations. And then the last strategy I want us to end with is to increase the opportunity for pro-social emotions. At the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, where I work, we often really remind people, as Alyssa did, that social connection is so important for regulating our emotions. And we need to have actually meaningful social connections, ways that it feels better to be together. So we want to share with you a gratitude kit. So a way that you can download PowerPoints and activities and exercises that really help support a feeling of what I'm doing here is meaningful. And in fact, I'm grateful for this opportunity. Forced gratitude never feels good, but is there something maybe each day or in between our shifts we can focus on that gives our mind that ability to, in addition to working with what might be hard, increasing what is good and already there? We also have an online institute for healthcare providers coming up with Alyssa and some other faculty from UCSF, Jyoti Marbin, Dacher Keltner from Berkeley, and Jamil Zaki from Stanford. And we're looking forward to sharing more of these ideas of stress resilience with you there. So I want to thank you so much for your kind attention, and really thank you, Alyssa and Dan and UCSF, for giving us this opportunity to be here together.